All right, so we're gonna start this thing off with a question real quick, and I'm genuinely interested. What are some of your hobbies? All right, if you're in full screen mode right now, go ahead and minimize that and just hop over there in the comments. What are some of your hobbies? Let us know. Woodworking, I don't know, gardening, collecting stamps, whatever that may be. What are some of your hobbies? And another follow-up question to that, did you ever or have you ever started a hobby where it felt like it took forever to get going? For me, about 11 years ago, I bought my first Toyota 4Runner, and I had these dreams of building this off-road, four-wheel drive camping machine. Now, it's been 11 years, and that first 4Runner that I bought, I put a lift kit on it and some bigger tires, and a bumper because the bumper got ripped off. I didn't really live up to those dreams and aspirations that I had for that project, for that hobby. And when you get into building out cars and stuff, it feels like it takes forever. Something breaks and you've got to replace it. This thing, you need this part so that you can get over those types of rocks and you can crawl on these types of trails. It's like a never-ending preparement just to get going on the trails. All right, it takes all of this pre-work, all this stuff that you've got to put into it just to get to the point where you can enjoy the hobby. And at some points, I mean, there were times in that 11-year span where I was just like, is this even worth it? Like, there's got to be more to this hobby of off-roading than just the truck sitting in the driveway and putting parts on it and never actually getting out on the trail. And sometimes in life, whether it's relationships, job, finances, raising kids, whatever it is, we can take a look and we can be kind of just stuck in this place where we're like, there's got to be more to life than this. What if we woke up every single day and we decided and tried to live a life that touched eternity? What would that look like for us?
Can I be honest with you about something? Well, I mean, what are you going to say? No. The truth is that my body is falling apart. Like, it feels like it was no time ago, maybe a couple weeks, but really it was more like 20 years ago. I could sprain my ankle on Tuesday and then play in a basketball tournament on Thursday. It didn't matter to me how bad I got hurt. I could always heal super quickly. But now, all of a sudden, it seems like I get injured in some way, like, I don't know, something really big, like stubbing my toe. And it doesn't ever expire. It feels like I'm creating a card catalog of injuries. They don't ever go away. They just keep getting stacked up one after another. And there's a certain point in your life, maybe you've already passed it, or maybe you're approaching it quickly, but there's going to be a point in all of our lives where our worst injuries happen when we're asleep. It's ridiculous. Because, like, I can get up in the morning and something has happened during the night and I can't move my arm. And my wife's like, what did you do? Did you do something yesterday? I'm like, no, I just slept funny. And I get injured in my sleep, and they don't go away. They just go in the card catalog. Maybe you're nursing something that feels like it's falling apart. Maybe for you it is your body, and you're getting that point in your life where the expiration date on certain parts of your body, maybe your knees or your fingers, are beginning to run their course, and you're trying to figure out how to make them last a little longer. Or maybe it's parenting. Maybe there's just, you kind of feel like everything just seems to be kind of coming apart at the seams, and the relationships are changing and so quickly you can't quite figure out how to do it. Or maybe it's your marriage. You feel like you're just grasping at every opportunity to hold it together. Or maybe it's your money, right? It just seems like there's not enough month. There's too much month and not enough money. Hey, it happens to all of us. And we all get to this place where it's not just the circumstances that are the problem. It gets to this place in all of our lives where the circumstances start to speak into the inside. And we just get exasperated. We're tired of trying to hold it together, trying to figure out how to make it work, trying to do everything. And we just get tired of it. And we need something so much more. And that's the problem that we live in, isn't it? It begins to give us this understanding that there's got to be something more to all of this. Because if this is all there is just going through life, one thing after another, trying not to die today so that I can die some other day, or trying to hold it all together so that I can just barely keep it together and have enough energy to stumble across the line. Well, that's how we all think of life, but I want you to know something. that during this series, that is exactly the opposite of the way that God wants you to feel. God wants you to be able to win from within. He wants you to have a renewed heart and spirit. In fact, that's kind of the key verse for this series is this one. It's though our bodies are dying, our spirits are being renewed every day. That's the kind of life that God wants you to live. A life where our bodies aren't the central focus, but this thing inside of us, this core of who we are, our spirit, is being made more new every single day. You see, the way we look at life is pretty much like this. We look at life like you don't get a lot of it at zero. And then as you kind of get towards your 20s and 30s, the amount of life you can live goes up. This is the way we think of it. And then once you kind of hit that 30 or 40 range, man, it starts going downhill quick. And as you get to your 40s or your 60s or your 80s, there's somewhere out there, there's going to be an end to it. And there's going to be a point where we're not above the lifeline, if you know what I'm saying. That's not the kind of life that God has for us. Hold on a minute, I'll explain. This is a bag of wheat. I said wheat with a T, not a D, just so you know. This is a bag of wheat, and these wheat berries are very important to food. Now, if I gave this bag of wheat berries, this exact bag, if I handed it to a baker would peel off some parts of it and get down to these little tiny berries, and he would dry them out, and then he could grind them up, and he could make out of this bag of wheat berries, he could make, maybe a part of a loaf of bread. There's not a lot here. I mean, by the time you pull away all the chaff and all the extra stuff and the shells and all this other stuff, what's going to be yielded out of this bag is very, very, very little. He might make the equivalent of a slice of bread or less. But if I took these same wheat berries and I gave them to a farmer and I handed them to the farmer could do something unbelievably different with it. He could take these berries and he would process them in the right way and he'd put them in the ground. And from that, he could grow more wheat from these berries and even more wheat than that. And he could take some of those berries and plant them again. And he could make almost an unlimited amount of bread. A baker, barely a slice. A farmer could make an unlimited amount of food. Now here's the question that we have. What's the difference? Well, one of them consumes, the other one invests. One of them sees a very small picture. The other one sees a very, very big picture. And the key difference is their perspective. You and I are intended to have a life that's so much bigger, so much more valuable, and so much more purposeful and meaningful and passionate than just getting up and grinding it out one day after another. Do you ever feel like that's the case in your life? Like you get up and you go to work, and then you come home from work, and then you rest a little bit, and then you go back to work again, and you keep doing it and doing it, one thing after another, every single day, until you die? Just tired of grinding it out? Well, that's not the life that God has for you. God has a life that's so much bigger and has so much more purpose and meaning and value than just grinding it out. You were never intended to be a baker. You were intended to be a farmer. You're not intended to grind it out. You're intended to invest it. And the key to this difference is your eternal perspective. It's our ability somehow to raise our eyes up from this world that we live in, from the today, right, to the big day. Like from this day that we live in the grind of things, to this out there somewhere world. This idea of the kingdom that God has for us. The kingdom of heaven is what really he dreams about for us. And it's not just going to heaven one day, it's being a part of his kingdom. In fact, when Jesus talks about this particular thing that he wants for us, he talks about it like it's an unbelievable treasure, a thing that matters. And he says this, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that a man discovered hidden in a field. In his excitement, he hid it again and sold everything he owned to get enough money to buy the field. And again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant who's on the lookout for choice pearls. When he discovered a pearl of great value, he sold everything that he owned and he bought it. Here's the thing. That's a lot of words, but what I want us to understand is these two phrases where he says he sold everything so that he could get enough money to buy it. Because something about the kingdom of heaven, something about this eternity that God has for us is so much bigger than just something we could leverage a little bit for. It's something that we should leverage everything for. If you and I could see the full value of this big picture, then you and I could really understand that it would be worth trading everything to accomplish. It's kind of like this rope. Imagine for a minute that your life is this rope, that it's out there, right? There's lots and lots and lots of it, and there's a ton of it in front of you. Now, we have a tendency to kind of forget how much life there really is, right? It stretches out forever, right? Now, we have to understand that our life isn't just this couple of minutes here. It stretches out forever, for eternity in that direction. Not just 50 feet tangled up here on the floor, but stretches out for eternity in that direction. But here's the problem. We don't see the value of all of that because we're focused on this. We don't see the value of the eternity in front of us because we're focused on this one little part, the maybe 80 or so years that the psalmist said we would last here. We work so hard, don't we? We spend all of our time getting up and going to sleep and working some more and getting up and going to sleep and working some more, having some kids and doing this. And we save and save and save and save and save so that we can travel a little bit before we spend a little time dying. Right? Do you see how futile it is for us to live our lives for this when there's all of this in front of us? When we see that these few years aren't nearly as important as all of those years, that the baker sees this, the farmer sees this. You and I need to understand that our life needs to be focused on all of the eternity in front of us, not just the life that we're living in this moment. But to see the big value that God has for us, we've got to see that big picture, don't we? We've got to have that perspective that stops looking at this life and starts looking down the line. Stops thinking that everything that valuable happens within these few moments here and start to understand that God has more for us down the line and that our life isn't about how we grind it out today, but how we invest it in eternity. C.S. Lewis said this about eternity. He said, "Today is the moment when time touches eternity." That's a powerful statement to me because I grew up in a world where church kind of taught me that eternity or heaven was going to be like one really long church service where I just imagined as a kid that we'd be sitting in pews and they would sing "Holy, Holy, Holy" over and over and over again for all eternity. Can I be honest with you? I can't imagine something that sounds more torturous than going to church for eternity. Now listen, I give my life to make church a valuable place to be. I love spending time worshiping God, and I'm not trying to demean that. But can I be honest with you? Going to Maui for a weekend really beats any day at church, hands down, doesn't it? Because that's not the eternity that God has for us. That's not the life out in front of us that God wants us to look forward. It's not an eternal church service. It's an opportunity for us to participate with Him. And it really is this. It's this life that God wants us to live, a life that increases with age and catapults into unbelievable life on the other side of this life. That these 80 years are a small part of where we learn to live, and that one day we get to participate in all of the kingdom, in all of this kingdom of heaven that's worth trading everything for. If we could learn to live like farmers instead of bakers, if we could learn to not grind it up and consume it today, but invest it in tomorrow, we could live this life alongside of what God has for the kingdom of heaven, this thing that we were intended to live for. In 2 Timothy, Paul writes to this guy named Timothy, and he says, this is a trustworthy saying. There are a lot of those in Timothy. And he says this is the trustworthy saying, if we die with him, Jesus, then we will also live with him. If we endure hardship, we will reign with him. Now, can I be honest with you? This idea of reigning with him freaks me out just a little bit. Like if I said to you that your job today, right now, changed and you're no longer an accountant, you're no longer a banker, you're no longer, a mom that stays home with kids, you're no longer a doctor or a lawyer, you are now a king. What if I told you that today you had to start reigning with God? That you had to start running all of the kingdom of heaven alongside of God. Are you ready for that? I'm not. I'm not even remotely ready for that. And the reason I'm not ready for that is because I'm only ready to do today. But what C.S. Lewis told us, what Paul's telling us here, is that we have to look forward to eternity, not like it's somewhere out there somewhere, like it's a church service that I'm going to go to at some point, but that you and I have an opportunity to live in eternity today. Here's the problem. When I was a kid, my parents, they wouldn't let me have a lot of chewy candy. Now, I think part of it was the motivation that giving sugar to a kid who had ADHD, I had ADHD back when they called it BRAT, and giving sugar to a kid like me was a bad idea. But they wouldn't let me have sticky candy because it would pull my fillings out. Maybe you've got kids and you told them the same thing. Now and Laters were one of those candies that I couldn't have. I couldn't have Now and Laters because I think my parents thought if you eat it now, I'll have to pay the dentist later. But the reason that they named Now and Laters is because they said if you eat one now, you'll want one again later. Now and Laters are how you and I need to look at eternity. We need to recognize that today is the moment where time, all of time past, touches time for eternity. Our life today matters for eternity. Your life today isn't something that you just live out and grind out and hope to one day go to heaven. You are living out eternity now. Some of it lived out here. This tiny little bit lived out here. The rest of it lived out ruling and reigning with God. So you ready for that? Probably not. I'm not. You know what I want to do? I want to use the now to prepare me for the later. Because there's something that happens in this world. There are some things that God does in our lives right now if we'll walk with him now to prepare us for later. Life and eternity, a little bit like a now and later. You do something now that prepares you for eternity, prepares you for later. What you do today prepares you for eternity. It's not just something that you kind of think up or dream of. It's something that you prepare and train for. Our Navy SEALs are some of the most gifted and well-trained military might in the world. They're trained in all kinds of unbelievable situations. But you know what they don't do? They don't train for every situation. They don't try to imagine, what if we had 3 people coming at us? What if we had 12 people coming at us? Well, what if 13 people came at us and 2 of them were little kids? And they train not for every imaginable situation. But you know what they do? They train to become the kinds of people who can adapt to any situation. That's what this life is for. This life is about us not learning everything we need to know about God so that we can one day go to heaven to spend eternity in a church service. This life is about us walking with God to become the kinds of men and women who can rule and reign with God for all eternity. There is a huge, valuable, purposeful, and meaningful life that God has for you for all of eternity. Don't be a baker and look at this. Be a farmer and look at all of that. Raise our sights from this world and recognize that our time, our talent, our treasure is all intended to be a place where we win within so that we can spend eternity ruling and reigning with God. God has a plan and a purpose for the rest of eternity that will make your 80 years here far more valuable than grinding it out day to day. More valuable than living for just what you can accomplish tomorrow. More valuable than what you can say, I'm going to save and save and save and save so that I can really live for the last 15 or so years. God wants you God wants me, God wants us to be the kinds of people who can rule and reign with him. And he wants to do something in and through you now that matters for later. The question that you have to ask is this simple question: what you do today will prepare you for eternity? Then this is the question. What are you doing today that will prepare you for eternity? You and I need to be the kinds of people who can see the more valuable life of a farmer, raise our eyes off of the today, and see later as something that matters even more. And that's how we begin to win from within. You know, when I was a kid, I learned to ride a bike like a lot of us did. You know, I learned to ride the bike, and I would, at first it was kind of wobbly, right? And then it got to a place where it was a little bit better and I could ride fast and I can go over big bumps and maybe even a ramp or two. I grew up in the 80s when we didn't wear bike helmets. You just did ridiculous things and paid the price later. But here's the thing that was great. There was this one day where I finally got the courage to take my hands off the wheels, off the handlebars. You remember that day? Remember that day when you were riding down the street and you went, and you put your hands up and put them back down real quick? And then your friends, maybe your friends, or maybe you were like one of my friends, that you could do it forever. I wasn't very good at riding without my hands on the handlebars. I got nervous, and I couldn't look up. I would only want to look down. And as soon as I looked at the wheel, it would get all wobbly, and then I'd fall over and scrape my face up on the ground and have to go cry to my mom. So I never really learned to do that. Maybe this is a better example. Do you remember dealing with these when you were a kid? Not playing baseball, but when you try to balance it on your hand, Whenever we first did this the very first time, what we did was we look at our hand, right? You'd go, man, I can't balance it. And as soon as you did, it would just fall away, right? But what we needed to do was not focus there. We know where we needed to focus. We needed to focus up here, right? But this is how we live our life, isn't it? Oh no, what about my money? What about my money, right? Oh no, what about my retirement? What about my retirement? What about my marriage, right? And then what happens every time we focus on what's down here? What happens is that we lose sight of what's important. But when we can focus on what matters most, right? When we can focus on all of eternity, the whole balancing act becomes far more easy to accomplish, doesn't it? We can live a life focused on tomorrow, or we can live a life focused on today. We can live the life of a baker, or we can live the life of a farmer. And it really comes down to what Colossians says in Colossians 3:2. It says, think about these things of heaven, not about the things of earth. Think about the big picture, not the little picture. Don't focus on our little problems here and there, right? Our little parenting decision today, or how we're going to spend our eternity, our retirement, but how we're going to really be able to invest and spend our eternity. Makes it much easier to balance today. So what if you and I, what if we became the kinds of people who focused our heads, and maybe even more importantly, our hearts, on the future? Not just on the future of the next 15 years. What if we became the kinds of people who focused our hearts and our heads on what matters most? Not the few years we'll spend here, but the eternity that we're going to be able to spend ruling and reigning with Jesus. That's really the question, and that's really the key to how you and I can win from within.